Transmatter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 616 podcast, your weekly exploration of the Marvel Comics multiverse. I'm Peter Watson, and I think I've got the wrong script.
And I'm David Steele, and I didn't know he was going to say that, and I'm absolutely delighted. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Listeners, we've already in the past taken a couple of sidesteps into stories published by other comics companies, and I think I'd been buying British reprints of The Defenders, and I saw something in one of those that had details on a Fantastic Four story that was reprinted in some issues of the Complete Fantastic Four, which is a weekly publication that Marvel UK ran in the 70s. But Marvel UK and what they did in the 70s would take a million years to bring you up to speed on, so we won't bother about that. And I thought, that looks quite interesting. So I did some more digging and thought we should maybe do this Fantastic Four story that I'm reading about in this British issue of Rampage that is talking about this FF reprint. And the more I dug, I thought it's not just a one-off, it seems to run through 4 issues. And then I found out that these issues of FF referenced a story from an issue of Strange Tales and a story from another issue of Fantastic Four. So basically, the short version is, this week, Peter and I are reading you a story from issue 103 of Strange Tales, and then we're going to read you a story from issue 118 of the Fantastic Four. Isn't that right, Peter?
It most certainly is. You did all that in one breath. Well done, sir.
Thank you. I've been rehearsing in my head for a few weeks, or since last week, since we decided to do this. Literally, almost last week, actually, from time of recording, but it's about a week till it comes out, so we're really cutting it fine at the moment.
Yes.
Everything will become clear, folks, don't worry. So without any further ado, Peter is going to tell us all about the cover to issue 103 of Strange Tales.
We don't have the DC Comics banner at the top. We do have the Strange Tales logo, 12 cents, approved by the Comics Code Authority. And there's an MC in a small box as well. I'm guessing that stands for Marvel Comics. There's a caption that says, Human Torch faces his most fantastic peril when he finds himself prisoner of the 5th dimension. And sure enough, it's a Human Torch story. Human Torch is in a big tank filled with water. He's manacled. He's trying to flame on, but obviously it's just his head and shoulders that are exposed above the water that he can ignite. We're in a futuristic landscape. Yes, there's a futuristic city in the background. There is a guard who is turning a big cog that seems to be channeling water into this tank. There's another guard who's guffawing at the front. He's having a whale of a time.
He is. Look, he's terrifying.
But directing the action is this other dimensional leader who is pointing at the man, instructing him, and he's saying,
More water! Soon the Human Torch and his flame will be finished forever!
Yeah. Now, I'm reading from my copy of the Human Torch Marvel Masterworks Volume 1, which is number 66 of the Marble Effect. But if you don't have that, listeners, you might have a copy of issue 3 of the Human Torch, cover date January 1975, which reprints this story and has a very dynamic cover, very, very similar in tone. Johnny manacled and held in this glass cabinet as water pours in, and everyone looks on as Pete said, he's trying to flame on, and it's not really working because of the liquid. Yeah, the Human Torch was I think it ran to 10 issues, reprints of Johnny Storm stories and Jim Hammond stories. Great fun. I've said in the past, I think, maybe elsewhere, that Marvel's devotion to their reprint programme in the 70s and 80s was laudable because it gave fans a chance to catch up on stories they might have missed,
Without a doubt, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading from. So, issue 103 of Strange Tales, published on the 11th of September 1962. And we shall dive straight in.
Like other boys in Glenville, Johnny Storm is often late to school.
Yes, in this first very small panel, we see Johnny Storm finishing off what's presumably his breakfast tea, or his breakfast coffee, or his breakfast orange juice, and as he takes this sip in this lovely domestic-looking kitchen setting, he says, Gotta hurry, I have a history test the first period.
But, unlike other boys, Johnny has a fantastic means of transformation.
See Johnny leaving the place where he lives, and he's saying, I'll change as soon as I'm out of sight.
Moments later, in a deserted alleyway,
Johnny raises his arms and yells, Flame on! Now, it's worth pointing out that a sort of idiosyncratic element of these Johnny Storm solo stories is that he seems to operate in a continuity where no one knows his identity as a member of the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
It takes a lot of getting used to, and it's just a bit bizarre that he kind of is behaving in almost like Peter Parker. But anyway, we then have a large panel which rounds out the rest of this opening page, and we receive the title of the story.
Prisoner of the Fifth Dimension, starring the Human Torch.
That's a great shot here. We see Johnny flying over his school campus. A couple of teens on the ground spot the Human Torch flying overhead, and one of them identifies him, points and yells,
"Look, it's the Human Torch!"
Flying overhead, the Torch thinks to himself, "I'll land in the woods behind the school where no one can see me change back into Johnny Storm." And along the bottom of the page, we get the credits for this issue.
Plot Stan Lee, script Larry Lieber, art Jack Kirby, inking Dick Ayers, lettering Art Simic.
Fantastic. Is this the first story involving Stan Lee that we've done on the podcast?
Yes, it is.
Interesting.
I believe so. Stan Lee making his Earth 616 podcast debut.
Amazing. Of course, it's not the first Marvel comic that we've done. We did that issue of Submariner that crossed over with Aquaman loosely a couple of years ago, so we'll remind you to go and check that one out if you haven't already. So we arrive at the top of page 2.
Later that day, Johnny overhears some interesting talk.
Yeah, Johnny's in the corridor, and as he's mooching along, looking a lot younger and thinner than than I imagine he should do in the FF stories. Anyway, some of his contemporaries at the school are standing behind him in a corridor, having a conversation. First lad, wearing a brown cardigan, as we might say over here, and brown trousers, is saying,
"They say that Bentley is the best house builder in the States."
A tall lad in a green jacket says, "Yeah? Then how come 3 of his homes have sunk into the ground?" And another lad in a very smart brown suit says,
"He was a fool to pick the swamp for his new housing developments."
And even at that moment,
we shift to the swamp to see a couple of building trucks, a few men in hard hats and work trousers and overalls, and a lovely wooden house that's been constructed freshly by the looks of things that is, I was about to say, up to its knees in mud, but the houses have knees.
Discuss.
Yes. Standing observing this disaster is Mr. Bentley, the builder, and a couple of his workies. Mr. Bentley says,
"Another one sunk during the night."
"I don't understand it, Mr. Bentley. We filled in the plot with hard soil to support the house. We figured out everything perfectly. The house shouldn't have sunk."
But it did. The question is, why? What went wrong?
You see Mr. Bentley, kind of portly-looking chap, the fancy hat, wearing a black tie, blueprints under his arm, and a voice from off-camera says, "I'll tell you what happened." Then we see in the next panel, a toothless old man with a thick white beard and grey dungarees and a green shirt and a wide-brimmed yellow hat is suddenly on the scene, and he's saying, "It's the swamp demons that done it. This is their home, and they don't like you knocking down the trees and destroying their swamp, so they're getting even." One of the workies says,
"Swamp demons? What kind of nonsense is that?"
"'Tain't nonsense. It's true. And if you know what's good for you, you leave while you still can." Mr. Bentley says,
"Bah, we've had enough troubles without listening to some simple farmer."
And so the old man's warning is ignored, for swampland is the cheapest land to build on, and George Bentley is determined to complete his project quickly.
Gosh. You see Mr. Bentley pointing back at the building site area and saying to one of his workies,
"Reinforce the plot with a double amount of hard soil."
"Right. We'll make that ground strong enough to support a skyscraper."
But that night, after the workmen have all left...
Yes, we see a couple of spooky-looking shapes. One of them appears to have very pointy ears. I'm reminded of Nosferatu for some reason, maybe because I've just seen that new film. But these two shadowy shapes lurking in the long grass and looking out at the building site, and one of them says,
"So they continue to build."
and his pal says, "We must teach them another lesson."
And the following day...
We're back on the building site with Mr. Bentley and a couple of his workies, and another house is sunk in the mud right up to its shoulders. One of the workies yells,
"It's happened again."
Another workie says, "Another house sunk." Mr. Bentley, looking as if he's at his wit's end, exclaims,
"It is impossible! We took every conceivable precaution!"
But then the old guy reappears standing in the grass next to a tree, and he yells, "I warned you! I told you to leave! The swamp demons will never let you build here!" And one of the workies says, "I'm almost beginning to believe that old crackpot." Mr. Bentley says,
"Well, I'm not ready to buy superstitious nonsense. Come on, let's check over the plans again."
Meanwhile, Johnny Storm has contacted the leader of the Fantastic Four.
Yes, we see Johnny basically talking to Reed on a video phone by the looks of things. Reed's on a big screen in front of Johnny. Johnny looks about, I don't know, he kind of looks like my cousin Peter when he was about 19. My cousin Peter Tweed, and that's obviously quite an obscure reference. I'm not sure anyone listening to the podcast, unless any of Peter's kids are listening, will get that reference. But, it's the best I can do. Reed Richards, making his Earth 616 podcast debut, is saying,
According to my findings, there is no natural reason for the houses to sink. I suspect sabotage. But you'll have to investigate further by yourself, for Sue, the Thing, and I are busy with another case.
Gosh, it's not much help for poor Johnny in the sinking houses, is it? Anyway.
And so, minutes later, the youthful adventurer appears on the scene.
Yeah, we see Johnny flying over the building site. We can see the house sunk in the ground. We can see the construction equipment, and we can see the builders and stuff on the ground. One of them points and yells,
Look, it's the Human Torch.
As he flies down towards them, Johnny says, I heard of the trouble you've been having. Maybe I can discover what's behind it. And then Mr. Bentley says,
Boy, we sure could use some help.
I'll look around under the marsh. It's easy for me to burn right through the soft, swampy ground. With that, going at some temperature, I imagine, Johnny flies down into the ground. It looks amazing. Maybe there'll be room for it in the socials. The next panel, we see the Human Torch flying around underground through the swampy land, and he's saying to himself, the soil seems hard enough. There's nothing here that could have pulled the houses down.
After a thorough but futile search,
the Torch in conversation with Mr. Bentley. I'm afraid I'm as baffled as you are. And then on the scene again is the toothless old guy in the dungarees and the hat who yells, I tell you, it's the curse of the swamp demons. You can't see 'em, but they're all over the place.
That night, Johnny Storm returns to the swamp.
And take a drink, listeners, because as Johnny walks through the swamp towards the building site, we can see the shell of one of the houses in front of him. A full moon hangs overhead. Johnny's saying to himself, demons, huh? Well, I'll find out, even if I have to hide here all night. A very moody shot in the next panels. Johnny peers into the distance thinking, footsteps. Somebody's coming. It's the old man. And he's with, holy cow, what are they? And we see Johnny's point of view. We see the elderly man who we've met already, but he's been accompanied by two weird-looking guys with green skin, thinning dark hair, wearing red overalls that have a yellow and black sort of detailing on them.
Incredulously, Johnny watches one of the unhumans turn on a strange machine.
Yeah, the machine that they're carrying, it looks like a sort of gun, basically, on a weird tripod. And one of the balding, greeny blue-skinned lads is leaning down and activating it as the old man and the other guy looks on, and it fires a yellow beam towards the foundations of one of the houses. Seeing this, Johnny thinks, it's giving off some kind of ray. The ray is affecting the ground. It's making it so soft that the house is sinking right through its supports. So that's how it happened. And indeed we see the yellow ray striking the ground and the house sinking into the mud. All that can be seen of the house in the next panel is basically the roof poking out of the ground. And as the old man looks on, the two unhumans, the two new arrivals in the green skin and the overalls, have a conversation. The first one says,
It is done. Now that I've turned off the electro-gamma waves, the soil will return to normal.
And in the morning, the humans will once more be at a loss to explain how their construction sank. Peering through the foliage and watching them, Johnny thinks, they're leaving now, but who are they? What's this all about? I've got to follow them and find out. Johnny follows them further into the swamp, and he observes and thinks, the old man has stopped, but the others are going on. Wait, something's happening to them. They're fading away. Yes, and as the old man raises his stick in a gesture, the two green-skinned fellows wave and then fade out of existence. Johnny's thoughts continue. They're vanishing, melting into nothingness.
A moment later, Johnny makes his appearance as the Human Torch.
Yep, Torch steps forward, confronts the old man, saying, I don't know who those two were, but it's clear that you're in league with them. Now, tell me what's behind all this, and skip the nonsense about swamp demons. And at this, the old man throws off his hat and straightens up, saying, So, you saw them, did you? Very well, then. It's no longer necessary for me to pretend to be human. And the old guy peels off his face. It was a mask. And we see that underneath he has the green skin, the thinning dark hair, the pointy ears, the wide eyes, the dark moustache around his mouth. He points a gun at the Torch and says, Now, my fiery friend, I will give the commands. You're wasting your time. Bullets can't hurt me. They melt the instant they hit my flame. Ah, but this weapon doesn't shoot bullets. It shoots antimatter electrons, which convert ordinary air into a liquid chemical. Observe, and he fires, and a gloop comes out of the gun, that's the only way I can put it, which extinguishes the Human Torch. Johnny yells, Oh, my flame is going out! And what was the old man is pointing his weapon at Johnny and he's saying, "Now that I've extinguished your flame, I can easily destroy you. I have merely to press this button, and my weapon will fire a lethal blast of electricity. But I won't do it, for I've other plans for you. Turn around and start walking." Johnny raises his hands, starts moving off, thinking, "I'm still too wet to flame on again. I'll have to do what he says. Walk 3 steps to the left. That's it. Now, 2 steps to the right."
Following the alien's instructions, Johnny goes deeper into the swamp until, suddenly...
Johnny looks down at his hands and they seem to just be turning white, but he says out loud, What's happening? I'm starting to vanish also." And the green-skinned bad guy says, "You're merely leaving your dimension of space and time and entering mine." And you can bet your bottom dollar that one of these panels will make it to the socials. There's a burst of yellow and golden energy and weird black lines twisting all around them. And then we get a large caption that reads Part 2,
Trapped in another world.
And we see Johnny and his captor standing on a yellow platform in the midst of a wild, massive alien city. There are long walkways and tall buildings of weird colours and weird shapes. There's an odd-looking red hovercraft-type thing floating about in front of them. Everyone seems to have green skin, and Johnny's captor is pointing around and saying, "Behold the 5th dimension. And now I shall take you to our warlord and claim the glory of your capture."
Johnny is soon brought before the Prime Minister of the 5th Dimension, a sneering despot named Zemu.
That's Zemu, spelt Z-E-M-U. Listeners, if you're wondering, pay attention, there'll be a quiz later. And see Zemu wearing a weird purple robe, some black detailing. He's sat on a throne surrounded by about 10 lackeys by the looks of things, 9 or 10 of them, all with the greeny blue skin, all wearing odd clothes. Johnny's standing below in front of him with an armed guard with a gun at him, and Zemu is saying,
"Ever since we discovered your world coexisting beside ours, we have prepared to conquer it. But till we were ready, we had to prevent your race from stumbling upon the passageway in the swamp that links these 2 worlds. That is why we had to keep you humans away from the swamp. Why we could not allow a housing development there."
Yeah, can you imagine?
As Johnny listens to the explanations, his eyes dart around. He notices that not all the onlookers seem pleased with his capture, especially one beautiful girl.
Yes, we see one very beautiful girl indeed. Very narrow waist and broad shoulders, etc. With the green and blue skin. She reminds me of, what's the name of the girl that kicked about with the submariner?
Lady Dorna?
Yeah, that's right. She's always dying, isn't she?
Dorna.
She's such a bore. She's always dying.
Mm.
But this girl, the green outfit with the yellow and black detailing, is standing behind the guard who's the gun on Johnny, and she's watching. She doesn't look too happy about the situation. Imagine Dua Lipa painted green, listeners, and you've got an idea. Torch is thinking to himself, "She's looking at me like she feels sorry for me."
But then Zemu gives a command, and Johnny is led away.
Yes, we see Johnny being led away again at gunpoint, and he's been taken to a large glass tank, which has a little tube at the front, which is a hatch, and some stairs leading up to it. Zemo is being borne on his throne by 4 lackeys. Johnny looks as though he's had something being attached to his face by a green-skinned man in swimming trunks. Now, while this is going on, Zemo is saying,
"Submerged in that liquid chemical, you will be unable ever to use your flame. You shall be kept here to show my people that I am more powerful than any foe, even the Human Torch."
We see that Johnny's being submerged in a tank by 2 of the green-blue-skinned locals. It's obviously not amphibious because they're wearing masks over their mouths to help them breathe, and they're lifting Johnny down into the tank as Zemo continues to say,
"The device you're wearing will supply you with enough oxygen to keep you alive, but you will remain our helpless prisoner."
And then there's a glorious say what you see caption.
And then, to make sure that Johnny can't escape, Zemu orders him chained to the tank.
Yes, we see Johnny with manacles around his wrist that are attached to a chain that are then attached to a sort of clasp on the wall. Johnny's been given a mask so he can breathe, so that's not too bad. At least they're not going to drown him.
As the grim hours pass, Johnny's plight seems hopeless. But then, at nightfall...
Yes, there's a close-up of Johnny. We don't see what he's seeing, but he's thinking to himself, "It's the gorgeous gal that I saw before. She's coming this way." You see that the gorgeous gal is engaging the guard who's keeping an eye on Johnny in conversation. The guard is wearing orange armour and a big blue helmet, which is a big fin, and he's saying to the new arrival,
I've seen you many times, but I'd never suspected that Valeria, the proud and beautiful daughter of Phineas, would be interested in me.
How could I resist one as handsome as you?
But the thrilled guard has not long to enjoy his good fortune, for a moment later...
Yes, Valeria, for that she has raised her right hand, and she has some jewellery, a ring on her middle finger, which is glowing. And she says, "Look at my hypno ring. Watch it glisten." The guard replies,
No, don't. Soon the guard is in a deep hypnotic sleep.
yes. And we see that, as well as Valeria, there's an older gentleman with thinning long white hair and a long white beard, and he is saying,
You have done your task well.
"Hurry, father. Free the human." And we see they have some assistants. They have their own pal in his swimming trunks with what looks like is that a golf bag over his shoulder? Probably not. I should put my glasses on. And he's opening the hatch in the front of the tank, and he's swum inside, and we can see that it's not a golf bag, it's a blowtorch, and he's cutting the chain that was holding Johnny. And as all this is happening, the elderly man, who we know is Phineas, he is saying,
That's it, Theos. Just a little more.
so it's Theos that's the chap that's helping Johnny. That's good to know. Phineas and Theos are supporting Johnny, who's still soaking wet and dripping, as Valeria says, "Thank heavens you're all right." Johnny says, "Yeah, thanks to you."
Moments later, at the home of his liberators...
Yes, we see Johnny sat with his hair all wet, with a towel wrapped around him. They're obviously trying to keep him warm and dry him out. Phineas is saying,
There are many of us opposed to Zimu, but he has the support of the army.
yes, and Theos, who I'll describe here, wearing a blue overall with a sort of black V detailing. He looks very much like Mr. Spock. And it's interesting because this is a year or two before Star Trek started, so I will attempt to do a Leonard Nimoy impression. Badly. Theos is saying, "It is they who want to invade your dimension, while we are weak and too unorganised to stop them." Valeria says, "If only you could help us." And Johnny, looking very much like a bedraggled Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits, is saying, "Well, that's just what I intend to do. Zimu and his buddies are going to rue the day they tangled with the Human Torch."
But while Johnny plans his course of action...
The guard who Valeria hypnotised is prostrating himself in front of Zimu, and he's saying,
And after they hypnotized me, they freed the prisoner.
Zimu is raging, evidently. He's raising a fist in the air and shaking it and saying,
We must recapture the torch at once. As for Phineas and his offspring, they shall pay for their defiance. Meanwhile...
Yes, we're chopping and changing. We're all over the place, listeners. Did Eric Sayward write this? We're back with the Human Torch and his pals Phineas, Theos and Valeria, and Phineas is pointing towards a large building and saying,
There's the arsenal where the weapons for the invasion are stored.
Theos says, "If only there was some way for us to enter." To which Johnny, of course, says, "There is! Watch! Flame on!" With that, he bursts into flames and flies off. Now, in the next scene, we cut to inside the arsenal where the weapons are stored and prepared and tested and such like, and we see a group of 3 scientists, all with the now familiar bluey-green skin and pointy ears and odd facial hair, and a variety of interesting tunics, and they appear to be firing an ice cream blast at a member of Sergeant Rock's Easy Company.
Is it Ice Cream Soldier?
It must be! Obviously! Why didn't I think of that? Does that give us an excuse for an Ice Cream Soldier cover gallery? Let's see what I can do. Right. The first of these weird alien scientists speaks and says,
This cold ray could freeze a human within seconds.
The next chap says, We'll turn the humans' troops into immovable icemen. And the guy who's actually firing this weapon at this very human-like dummy concludes,
They won't stand a chance against us.
Then suddenly bursting into the room, flying in, is the Human Torch, who yells, "Sorry to knock you off Cloud 9, but the party's over, chum." As he flies around the room, Johnny spooks the aliens, and this makes the dummy of the soldier fall over. The first alien scientist exclaims,
What?
And the one in the middle yells, "It's the prisoner! He's become a creature of fire!"
Summon reinforcements quickly,
says the man in red who was operating the gun.
But as more guards arrive on the scene...
Yep, Human Torch, going at some extra temperature, I must imagine, to do this, yells to himself, "Time to head underground!" And we see him for the second time in this story take a drink, burning down into the ground and flying away from them that way.
And at that moment, outside the arsenal...
We're outside with Phineas and Valeria and Theos as we see a familiar purple-robed slave point at them all and say,
Ah, we have found the traitors. The torch must be nearby.
Theos exclaims, "Zimu!" as we see all the guns being pointed in their direction. Oh my goodness.
Meanwhile, as the torch blazes underground, he melts the foundation of the arsenal.
Yes, great shot of Johnny flying underground and basically melting the rock that this building is built on. A scientist fellow, who I don't think we've seen before, yells,
"Look, the walls are shaking!"
And another chap says, "The floor is caving in! The whole building is collapsing!" And another chap, who's obviously very scared indeed, yells...
He's obviously a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan. He yells, "Flee! Flee!"
Yes, maybe he's hoping that the Red Hot Chili Peppers will come and save them. Listeners, what do you think of the Red Hot Chili Peppers? Email...
The Earth616podcast
yes,
at gmail.com.
We're going to have to set up an email account for this, you realise that? Anyway, Johnny flies up out of the ground, saying, "That finishes the arsenal. Now to... Wait! They're my friends! They're in trouble!" And we see that there's a weird machinery, a weird tank with what looks to be very much, and it's confirmed by some of Zemu's dialogue, sending out radiating magnetic waves, which are lifting Theos, Phineas and Valera up into the air as Zemu looks on and says,
Behold, how helpless the traitors are against the pull of the magnets.
The pull of the magnets, of course, supported the Montrose Avenue at Leeds Cockpit in 1998. We see Johnny's three pals stuck against the magnets, and Zemo points at Johnny, who's flying in the air, and says,
Hear me well, Torch. Unless you extinguish your flame at once, my firing squad will slay your three co-conspirators.
Torch replies to Zemo saying, Guess again, Zemo. I have a lot of powers you don't know about, such as the power to create smoke screens. And Johnny does just that the next panel, sending all of Zemo's mates into a frenzy of, well, coughing, because we hear lots of... And someone says,
My eyes, I cannot see.
And Johnny says, Now, while they're busy, we see him generating some heat, using his powers on the magnet, and Valera helpfully points out for the hard of thinking, You're melting the magnet. And Johnny says, as he grabs her, I'll have you safely on the ground in no time. Oh, exclaims Valeria, you're wonderful. And then we arrive at top of page 11, and a caption reads,
Part 3. The End of Zemu.
Well, that's a bit of a spoiler of a title, isn't it?
But the powerful Zemu is not to be defeated so easily. Realizing the might of his fantastic foe, he sends his most potent weapons into the fray.
Johnny and Theos and Phineas and Valera are standing on the ground, and all of a sudden some massive tanks are suddenly rolled up. Guns at the front, spikes sticking out the tyres. They're all very Jack Kirby in design. You can probably imagine them. And I'm sure this panel will make it onto the socials. As they roll towards our heroes, Zemu stands waving his hands in the air and yelling,
You're a mighty foe, Torch, but even you can't withstand the onslaught of my fireproof giant tank core.
That's what you think. I'll melt their bullets and shells just as I did the magnets.
Oh, you won't, for the ammunition in the tanks has been coated with an asbestos solvent. It will not burn. This time, you're doomed, Torch. A moment later, the tanks open fire.
Yes, and we see the Torch flying up into the air in a sort of ever-decreasing series of loops as he cries, If I can't melt their ammo, I'll defeat them another way.
Flying in a circular motion as swiftly as he can, the Torch creates a hot swirling current of air, which soon builds up into a super tornado.
Yes, and we see the big twisting air currents. The captioning continues.
And nothing made of mere metal can withstand the awesome force of the super twister.
And final panel, page 11, we see chunks of the tanks flying all over the places. From inside the twister, we hear Johnny's voice as he says, I can control the blast so that it is pinpointed at the tanks alone. Wow, such skill. Don't remember him using any of these sorts of powers when I was reading the FF in the 80s. Johnny alights with Theos, Phineas and Valera as Theos says, You defeated his tank corps, but Zemo still has thousands of loyal troops stationed throughout the land. Phineas says,
The only way to topple his regime is to cause a general uprising. A revolution is the answer, but how can we spread the word to the masses? Zemu controls all the communication systems.
There's one he doesn't control. Watch! With that, Johnny flies up into the air over a beautiful Jack Kirby cityscape. There's what looks like a stadium, and the building, it looks like it's made up of skittles connected by a big tube.
Soaring high into the air, the Torch blazes a message of fire across the sky.
And as the plebs of the fifth dimension look on and point up into the air, we see that Johnny has written the phrase, Arise! Arise against tyranny! Defeat Zemu!
And, encouraged by the fiery plea for defiance, realizing that they have a super powerful ally, the people begin their revolts.
We're back on ground level and we can see a bunch of the blue and green fifth dimensional beings, and they've got pipes and guns and they're all raging. They're furious. They have revolted. We hear one man saying,
"Down with Zemu!"
and a couple of other chaps saying in perfect synchronicity,
Follow the flaming humans, strike for liberty.
And like all just causes, it ends with the defeat of the totalitarian forces.
We see Zemo on ground level rushing towards what looks like a weird submersible capsule or something that's made out of glass. Maybe it's just the way it's been illustrated and coloured. Human Torch flying after him saying, Zemo, he's trying to escape.
But before the evil dictator can reach his escape ship, the Torch imprisons him in a cage of fire.
Yeah, this is cracking. Johnny flying overhead, casting loops of flame and bars of flame that form around Zemo, preventing him from getting to his vehicle. You see Theos and Phineas and Valeria and some others standing around us. Zemo looks very grumpy indeed with his arms folded. Theos says, he doesn't look like much of a menace now, does he?
Tyrants never do, in the end,
says Phineas. And then Grumpy Chop Zemo says,
if only that fool had not captured the Human Torch.
Next panel is obviously a bit of a slow dissolve. We see Theos, Phineas, Valeria, and Human Torch in his civvies as Johnny Storm. Theos is saying, from now on, we'll live in peace as free men. Phineas says,
and needless to say, there will be no invasion of your dimension.
Valeria's playing with the front of Johnny's top as she says, although I would like to visit your world and to visit you. Mm-hmm. Well, sure, sometime, says Johnny. No, don't go yet. Please stay. There's so much I want to ask you and tell you. I've never known anyone as wonderful as you. Well, thanks, Valeria. I wish I could remain here, but I can't. I must go home to my sister, to my friends. And we see Johnny standing on a golden platform. Seems to be being raised up. He's waving to the others down the ground and he says, farewell. Theos cries, good luck, Torch. Valeria cries, Torch, come back, come back. And her dad says,
perhaps he will return someday. Who can tell, dear? Who can tell?
We see Johnny standing in a swamp, fading back into our reality, and the sort of mist sort of drifting around. And as he re-establishes, he's thinking, phew, who'd ever have thought that some sinking houses would lead to an adventure in another dimension? And there's a slow dissolve.
And so Johnny's adventure is ended, but for the next couple weeks, he has a tough time concentrating on his own world.
And we see Johnny in the classroom, books piled up on his desk, pen tapping away at his ear as he gazes into the middle distance thinking, gosh, that Valeria was so beautiful. I'll never be able to get her out of my mind. But then Johnny's teacher spots that he's distracted and he yells,
Johnny Storm, are you paying attention to the lesson? You look as though you're in another world.
Sorry, Mr. Harris. I must have been daydreaming. Then he thinks to himself, another world. I guess he'll never know how right he was. And a small caption says,
The end.
Well then, what do you think of that?
That was great fun, terrific fun, lovely Jack Kirby art as ever. We've had quite a lot of that on the Earth 616 podcast lately, and it's been a joy, an absolute delight. Johnny's quite the stud muffin. It seems a big hit with the interdimensional ladies.
Well, you know, when you look like Chris Evans, of course that's going to happen. No, I liked it. It rattled along. It was great fun. And it's another mention of the fifth dimension.
It is indeed, yes.
A mention of the fifth dimension.
I'm very glad that Johnny seems to have solved the problem of this landowner who's trying to build cheap housing in dodgy areas for people. That's what you want your heroes to do in the 60s. Also, another thing that's really dated, which I found hilarious, was the mention of, wait till I find it, where's the page? When Zemu says,
the ammunition in the tanks has been coated with an asbestos solvent.
Yes.
It will not burn.
Thing is, in Marvel Comics at this time, in tons and tons and tons of stories involving the Human Torch, people were always using asbestos to protect themselves against him, or to use as a defense, or to use as some sort of weapon against him. And obviously, we know these days that was maybe not a good idea.
Yeah. I can remember my primary school having to get some work done on it structurally because of asbestos or something like that at one point. I could be wrong. Maybe it was just fiberglass. But I remember stuff on That's Life and on the news about it, the danger of it, and hearing how the rehearsals of certain Doctor Who stories were interrupted and disturbed because of asbestos being dealt with. But yeah, I remember lots of stories of asbestos suits and all that sort of thing, and wouldn't happen nowadays.
Nope.
I mean, in some ways, this is quite a standard sort of generic, almost Burroughs-esque thing of hero ends up in another reality and the girl falls for him and he saves them with revolution and they want him to stay, but he has to go home. It's a bit formulaic, but I loved it. I can't lie. It rattled along. It was great, great fun.
It does look like Johnny lives in this little town.
Yes.
As opposed to in the Baxter building, as you're saying, you know. And the fact that Reed says, you'll have to investigate further by yourself or Sue, the Thing and I are busy with another case. What other case? I want to see this. What's happening?
The Fantastic Three.
I think they've just been invited to some sort of soiree and they think, we can't bring the kid along. No. We're too busy putting keys in the bowls. That's
a very Peter Watson thing to think about. I get what you mean. I think I first became aware of the sort of weird disconnect with the Silver Age Human Torch. I think it was either my friend Laura in HMV Argyle Street telling me about it, or else it was an article in Comic Book Marketplace or something, or Alter Ego, one of those things which talked about how Johnny had this whole other life as a college kid, completely separate from what was being published in Fantastic Four at the same time.
Sure.
I've had the masterwork for about 10 or 12 years, but I've only read bits of it. I'm going to read some more, obviously, after reading this one. But it's a weird sort of thing because we see him consciously changing in an alleyway so that no one will see him. But then, surely if he's Blonde and Johnny Storm and the FF are on television and their secret identities are public knowledge, then everyone's going to know? I don't know.
You would think. They'd know who his sister was, you would think. And, she's quite well known. Well, who knows? I mean, you could always say that he was always flaming on in public. So it's not like these days where obviously everyone basically gets their phone out and takes pictures of everything and films everything.
Of course.
Back then, you could have a fleeting glimpse of someone and you might not recognise them and think, he looked a bit like that guy? But is it? Could it be?
Yeah, I suppose.
There's that possibility, yeah.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I really like the method of getting transported to the fifth dimension.
Yeah.
Doing a couple of steps to this way and a couple of steps that way. And the pelvic thrust and all that, and you're going through that. I found myself thinking in the prep for this week and next week's episode, I wonder if Man-Thing and his spawn being a nexus of realities and all that sort of thing, I wonder if that's ever tied into it. But someone else can have the time to go and read every single Man-Thing story and see if it's got a reference to this Human Torch story. I don't know if that's the sort of, strikes me as the sort of thing that Roy Thomas might reference at some point. I don't know.
Did Roy ever write Man-Thing? I don't think he did.
Oh, I think he was involved in the creation vaguely, or was it Len? I can't remember. I remember though reading something quite recently where Roy was sort of critical of the direction that Man-Thing had gone in.
Mm-hmm.
Once Gerber got a hold of it, I don't think he was. I don't think it's the more sort of cosmic sort of. Shall we say, druggy stories? I don't think that's exactly what Roy had in mind. He probably just, had a heap rip-off sort of thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Swamp Monsters, I love them. The reason we've done this one, listeners, is because the story we'll be talking about, the issues of FF that we're covering next week, they tie into this one quite closely. And I sort of thought, I could write a lengthy flashback sort of summary, or we could have a bit of fun and just do the stories.
Yes.
Because of that reasoning, that's what leads us to the next story that we're going to give you, which is from issue 118 of the Fantastic Four, published on the 26th of October, 1971, 2 days before my dad's 31st birthday. So that's nice.
Oh, there you go.
Peter is going to tell us about the cover to Fantastic Four, issue 118.
We have the banner at the top, Fantastic Four, Marvel Comics Group. Issue 118, 20 cents. The world's greatest comic magazine, Fantastic Four. All new and all great. Approved by the Comics Code Authority. My goodness, that's an awful lot for that top third. And in the corner, we have Bashful Ben Grimm himself. And he's coming at ya with a raised fist and a wonky jaw. It's bizarre. But the main image in the cover, we have Crystal, the Inhuman. And she's wearing what looks like a belly dancing outfit. And she's blasting the Human Torch. Gasp. Who's flying towards her. At the front, there's Lockjaw, who's laying into Bashful Benji himself.
Oh my goodness.
And trying to pull him back with an outstretched arm is Reed Richards, who's saying, "No, you can't have turned against us. Not you." And hanging on to Reed for grim life is his wife, Sue, the Invisible Woman. Gasp. At the bottom, there's a big caption that says, "Thunder in the Ruins. Plus, the Thing fights alone."
And it's the Thing fighting alone that we're going to cover. So Going to be very brief, listeners. The main sort of drive of the plot of issue 118, towards the end, there's lots of kerfuffle, there's a big explosion in a castle, and Lockjaw sort of teleports the Thing out of the castle. Everyone else reading through are all sort of like, oh my goodness, what about Ben? Is he all right? And then the Thing and Lockjaw arrive. And it's clear from what the Thing says that they haven't arrived with them straight away, that they've had a distraction, as it were. And it's this distraction which is the backup story, the shorter story at the later half of issue 118, and that is what we're going to read for you now. An establishing caption at the top gives us the credits for this story and a little bit more too.
Stan Lee, editor, Archie Goodwin, writer, John Buscema, artist, Jim Mooney, inker, Sam Rosen, letterer.
Explore an instant of time. An instant from the preceding story when the Thing and Lockjaw teleported out of an explosion, and for its duration are thrust into... What mad world?
Now, straight away, we're in what appears to my eyes to be the backlot set of some kind of Hammer horror movie set at Bray Studios. There's lots of old-fashioned buildings and cobbled streets and gas lamps and stuff, and with a burst of yellow energy, the rocky orange form of the Thing and a big lumpy dog that is Lockjaw of the Inhumans appear in the midst of this scene, and the Thing says,
"What have you done, you nutty pooch? 1 minute a mind temple is blowing up on us, now we're in this place. And it sure ain't Central America or the 20th century. Looks like a leftover set from Werewolf of London." And though not correct, that thought is closer to the truth than Ben Grimm knows. But the danger in this darkness and thickly choking fog is not supernatural, though no less deadly.
And we get a close-up of a gun being held by a brown-gloved hand that fires with a schnick sound effect, and it fires a burst of yellow energy that strikes Lockjaw.
"What in?"
exclaims Ben, and then a voice off-camera says, "1 curare pellet from my air gun has immobilised your hound. A second shall do far worse to you." And then we see this figure revealed, wearing a brown top hat, a purple long coat or cape, holding this gun, emerging from the fog, pointing a gun at the Thing, and this new arrival continues, saying, "Ironic, no? This time Moriarty springs the trap and Holmes falls victim."
"Yeah? Pal, maybe you freaked out in Arthur Conan Doyle, but I ain't no Basil Rathbone. Any talking or deducting I do comes after my clobbering."
And with that the Thing wallops the new arrival, sending him flying. Falls back on the ground, hat falls off. Ben looks down and says,
"Dunno why you wanted to play baddie in some Sherlock Holmes game, fella, but..."
Then he notices, as the coat falls open,
"Sheesh, it ain't a guy. It's some kind of robot. But the face, it's Reed's."
Yeah, we see above the damaged metal torso the face and head of Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic. Good grief. Ben looks around in the fog, saying,
"Can't figure it. And I ain't so sure I wanna. Better just try to revive Lockjaw and get out of... He's gone! Without that teleporting pup, I'm trapped in this crazy burg."
Yep, no sign of the dog. He is not where he was. The Thing seems to have gone mad in the next panel as he says,
"I don't know who's pulling what around here, but if Crystal's ever-lovin' pet ain't handed right back, you better believe I'm gonna rip up real estate until I find him."
And then with a massive crunch sound effect, the Thing grabs at the nearest building to him and starts pulling it apart. Goodness me. We see that he's pulled a hole in the side of a building, which seems to be some kind of castle. He stepped into what looks like a sort of dining room belonging to someone like, I don't know, the Sheriff of Nottingham or something, or King John or something. Because we see the Thing poking through this hole in the wall, and we see armoured men wearing chainmail and bearing swords, and one chap who looks very much like Reed Richards pulling a sword and saying, "Locksley, you varlet! You've come once too often to Nottingham Castle. This visit you'll dine on the High Sheriff's steel."
"Huh?"
Raising his sword, this chap in the red doublet and chainmail rushes forward, saying, "At him, men! Slay the outlaw rogue! Slay the bandit Robin Hood!" Oh, cracking. The Thing grabs one of the tables from the room, swings it around, sending everyone flying, saying,
"Excuse the table, fellas, but I didn't bring my bow and arrow."
Thing moves forward towards a doorway at the other side of the room.
They're all a bunch of robots, just like that first one.
And we get a close-up of the damaged High Sheriff robot that just tried to tackle Ben. And Ben obviously gets a better look at him because he says,
"And the main bad guy is Treacher's kisser again. Maybe this door leads out of this loony bin."
And he steps outside in the final panel of page 3. And we can see he's emerged from a building which bears the sign General Store. It's obviously some kind of Western scenario because we see a couple of pistols being pointed at our orange hero. And Ben sees all this, takes it all in and says,
"Oh no, another straight scene from the Late Show."
And a voice off camera says, "We've been waiting for you, Earp." And then we see that Ben is standing, looking up at a sign that says OK Corral, which is 3 men who all look a bit like Reed Richards in various colour combos of cowboy gear. One of them says, "Us Clennans are gonna settle who runs Tombstone, Marshal." Ben looks at them, takes in the resemblance to his pal and thinks,
They're all Stretch. I've stepped into some crazy Disneyland enacting old legends with Reed as villain in them all.
and then suddenly, out of nowhere, the ground opens up beneath him and Ben falls into a hole, exclaiming,
"Hey, what in the name of Aunt Petunia's happening now?"
and then with a
Whomp.
and a
Oof!
he falls to the ground. A voice off camera says,
Forgive this unceremonious welcome, Ben Grimm, and my delay in bringing you to me.
and this chap, who we don't see properly just yet, we see a large looming shadow though, seems to be behind glass, and he's obviously got hold of Lockjaw, seems to be lying on a table, and this new arrival is saying,
But I have been testing your pet to learn where you came from and why. Do not fear, he is unhurt.
Ben says,
Well, that won't be true for you, Cuddles, once I smash my way through this glass. Ow!
yeah, Ben tries to punch his way into the other room. He's unsuccessful. The other chap says,
It is completely shatterproof, Mr. Grimm, even against your power.
and in the next panel we're sort of on the other side of the glass looking through at our thing, who is shaking his fist and saying,
Be glad it is, Buster, 'cause I got you figured. You got it in for Reed, so you get your cookies off running through this little funhouse, playing hero and making him the heavy.
and then the chap who Ben is talking to, with a click of a switch, turns a light on, and we see another version of the thing wearing a white lab coat. And he says,
Yes, you stumble into my own private and bitter form of amusement, but upon seeing me, won't you grant I've reason to hate Reed Richards?
next panel, the first panel of page 5 is tremendous because we see the two things sort of separated by the glass. On one side of the glass, our thing says,
Oh my gosh, how the heck can it be?
and on the other side of the glass, the other thing says,
When Lockjaw teleported, you crossed a dimensional barrier to here, an alternate universe, one shockingly similar to your own, yet amazing in its differences.
the next couple of panels are flashbacks with oddly shaped borders that are narrated by this new arrival. He continues,
Here, for instance, the fatal trip into space that produced the Fantastic Four in your world was made only by 2.
and we see the familiar figures of Reed Richards and Ben Grimm wearing green spacesuits with red boots and gloves and detailing, carrying helmets, walking towards some kind of transport. The narration continues.
Reed Richards, who insisted on doing it, Ben Grimm, who reluctantly assisted. The cosmic rays that bombarded the spacecraft were the same, but the effect on the occupants far different.
And in this panel we see the familiar image of the space rocket that took the FF into space, flying through the green and blue cosmic rays that are dissecting space. As Ben says,
Yeah, I can tell just by listening to you talk, pal. But if you came out genius enough to build all this, what's the gripe? I was bitter to Reed too, but you learned to accept looking like this. It ain't stopped my gal Alicia from caring.
there's a clack as the new thing presses a button which raises the glass between the two of them, and the new thing says,
I am releasing you, Mr. Grimm. Lockjaw is regaining consciousness. You'll be able to leave. As you see on the scanner, guests are arriving. I prefer you departed before they're inside.
and we see on a scanner a very familiar vehicle making its landing, and Ben points and says,
Hey, it's the Pogo plane!
and then we see on the screen a hatch opening up on the side of the pogo plane, two people emerging. There's a blonde girl looking very fit, and another chap. From at this point we can see he has brown hair and he's elongating himself in the Mr. Fantastic style, and the new thing says,
Correct. It is my fellow superhero, Mr. Fantastic, and his lovely wife. They sometimes visit me here on my island of solitude.
we see that the new Mr. Fantastic, not only can he stretch, but he's flying up through the air and twisting around the pogo plane on fire like the Human Torch. The new thing says,
You can see Mr. Fantastic has considerably more powers in my universe.
Ben says,
But he's still a cornball, zooming down to impress Susie and...
he lands, the flames switch off, and Mr. Fantastic leans in to kiss Sue, and Ben notices,
Wait, that ain't Reed.
It's me. Me the way I used to be before... Yes, in this world, Mr. Fantastic is Ben Grimm.
Lockjaw has joined them. Ben looks incredulous, wide-eyed, wide-mouthed as he says,
You mean, you're Reed Richards?
and the new thing, with his arms folded and his lab coat, looks very sad indeed as he says,
The man who insisted on that space voyage. The man who made himself a thing and lost the woman he loved to his best friend. Perhaps now you understand the sad, bitter charades I stage on my solitary island. Now go quickly, Ben Grimm, before my envy of you and the alternate universe you're from overwhelms me. Go, and remember that here there has never been an Alicia to console a man turned monster.
And with that, Ben puts a hand on Lockjaw's shoulder. Lockjaw flares yellow, and they vanish.
Thus, back in his own world, where Ben is questioned about where his teleportational trip with Lockjaw took him,
And we see the familiar versions of Reed Richards and Sue Storm in their FF uniforms standing behind as Ben says,
you two lovebirds wouldn't believe it. In fact, I ain't even sure I do.
and he thinks to himself,
And maybe it's better that way.
and a caption reads,
Fini.
Wonderful. Well, that was interesting. I have to say, I haven't read an awful lot of Fantastic Four outside what I read in the mid-80s and the early 80s and a lot of the John Byrne stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not entirely au fait with how many stories there might have been where they met alternate versions of themselves in the FF or whatever.
Yeah.
That was very interesting. It's an obvious sort of what-if type idea, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes, but wonderfully executed. And again, it's just a 6-page story, but it's incredible. And to have a little side adventure mid-story is epic. And it's exactly the sort of thing we cover on the Earth 616 podcast. These other universes.
Yes.
I do love the fact that Reed is just so... Well, new Reed is just so weighed down with guilt
Yeah.
and depression and just wanting to cut himself off from everything, but he's still the scientist. But obviously he's got major issues. He's trying to work out the fact that he's got all these robot duplicates of himself running around doing things. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I mean, this is complete Marvel pathos. It really is. It's the drama, it's the gravitas, it's the soap opera, it's all the things you get from Marvel Comics of this era. It's epic, it's enjoyable. I loved every panel of it. It was superb.
It's very Marvel angst, isn't it? It's got all that on tap.
Yeah.
And I have to say, very quickly, can you remember when you first encountered Lockjaw of the Inhumans?
Lockjaw, yes. It was in a British Hulk annual that reprinted a Hulk king-size special, I think it was. It had Maximus in it. All the Inhumans were in it. And I'm sure Lockjaw was in that. What about yourself?
I can't remember. I'm a great doggy person, as you know. Dogs are my fave. Hi to Harry, if you're listening. I have such vague memories because I was really young. I was like 3 or 4 when I was sort of first exposed to sort of a lot of the Marvel characters, because there was a couple of boys at the sort of Sunday school summer mission at our church in Foxbar. Believe it or not, it used to be packed. Very simpler time 50 years ago. Because it was, I think I've told you in the past, Pete, how the information my dad gave me at one point when I was very young, that the Thing was just something else that the Hulk turned into.
Yes, that's correct. I remember that.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling it was probably around about this time, because it was around this time that I remember being first aware of people like the Vision and Black Bolt and registering Lockjaw, and because he was a dog, and we might have had our first dog by that point. So I kind of remember just really liking this idea of this dog with a tuning fork on his head who could teleport. And I've read a few bits and bobs of them since. Yeah, I just think he's really cool. Just to echo what you're saying, I agree, it's an interesting story. I mean, Reed is full of survivor's guilt and all that, isn't he?
Yeah.
About everything that happened to the team and all that. And it's interesting to see this different way of it being sort of demonstrated or portrayed or shown or whatever. It was an interesting little one, and it strikes me very much that this was being set up for them to come back to and do something else with.
Yes. One aspect of this that I really enjoyed as well, comparing it with the main Earth 616, where Reed has got the huge guilt over Ben's transformation, because Reed was the one that insisted that they went. And so Reed is always trying to cure Ben. I've lost count of the number of stories where he tries that and something goes wrong, or he's partially successful or whatever. But in this, because Reed is the one that's transformed, he's not got that guilt, as it were, to kind of like focus on someone else. He sees it as his punishment for forcing this on his pal. as it were.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a form of self-pity in a way, isn't it?
It's his hubris that basically just made him go off without his radiation shielding. And Ben's living the high life, pretty much. He's living it well. Sorry.
Dearie me. Yeah, it's a great example of what Marvel would go on to do in the late 70s, with their What If series. It's a great sort of almost like a little pilot for that sort of thing.
I mean, even recently they've had that What If Mickey Mouse and his pals gained the powers of the Fantastic Four. I mean, they're still doing this. I mean, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and everyone, they all had the powers of the FF. They've done that as What Ifs several times. What if the FF didn't gain powers?
Yeah.
There've been loads of variants in that.
Yeah.
What If's a fantastic series, but as I said, recently we've just had the Mickey and Friends.
Yeah. I read quite a lot of the second volume of What If because that sort of was in the process of being published when I first discovered FP in my first comic shop. And I've read quite a few of the older ones, and I seem to remember there's an opening splash in issue 1 of What If where the Watcher sort of casts around and I'm sure he mentions discontinuity. It's either this one or the stories we're going to talk about in our next episode that he refers to. I'll maybe see if I can get hold of that double-page splash to use as bonus content at some point in the next couple of weeks, which is great fun, is that opening splash panel not even alludes to it, kind of very clearly references when Spider-Man and Superman teamed up. And of course, that's something that you and I will be getting to before too long. So listeners, with all of this in mind, keep these two stories in your head over the next few days as I finish writing the script for next week's episode as the Earth 616 podcast returns with another story featuring all of the members of the Fantastic Four.
So what have you thought about this interesting sidestep? You can email us at our alternate email address, theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media because David's scooped up some amazing bonus material for this and of course every episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter at podcast_Earth2, and it's the number 2 for all of our socials.
It really is. Listeners, if you enjoyed this little sidestep, tell your pals, because we're normally, as you know, a DC Comics podcast, so you might have some pals that are FF fans that might want to hear what we've got to say. Our pal Ross does a regular FF reading on Stop Let's Team Up, so make sure you check those out. And, as I always say at this point, if you're enjoying what we're doing, please go to wherever it is you receive your podcast and give us a positive review. You can find your way to our link tree and find a way to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of a beverage, as he no doubt does the very tricky editing for this episode. And as I say, we will be back next week with another adventure featuring the Fantastic Four. Well, a number of adventures in our slightly condensed, summarised stroke reading some of it type form featuring the Fantastic Four. And we'll have another chat about the Fantastic Four, I'm sure, next week. On that bombshell,
I've been Peter.
and I've been David. And we'll see you soon on
the Earth 616 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
Walk 3 steps to the left. That's it. Now, 2 steps to the right. He's going to get him to do the time
It's
warp.
the pelvic thrusts. It really drives you insane. Following the alien's instructions, Johnny does the time warp again.
Hear me well, Torch, for I project marvelously.